Cool. You got to answer the same question, BJ. Last trip and next trip.
Last trip, well, I'm on my current trip in New York, actually. And then upcoming trip, I am taking a break for a little bit. I'm trying to think of, I don't have anywhere kind of super exciting. I'll head up to San Francisco for a trip in a couple weeks. So
Cool. Very cool. Well, good deal. Well, why don't we start with introductions and then we can jump into things. And just after introductions, we're actually going to play a little clip of a new sort of United campaign right now that BJ and I thought it'd be great to share with everyone. So my name is Matt Kilmartin. As Kerry said, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Habu. Habu is a data clean room software company. And primarily what we do is we help brands gain deeper insights about their customers, drive better measurement through privacy safe data collaboration. Some of you might be familiar with the data clean room word around the walled gardens, which is definitely something Habu does, but we also sort of help companies build sort of data partnerships without actually sharing data. And that's really what a data clean room is. So, a lot of use cases around marketing. So really just excited today to talk to BJ about United and what's going on in the travel industry, and lots of great stuff happening at United. And we're looking forward to today's conversation. So BJ, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and your role at United?
definitely, that'd be great. We're going to get in the virtual background up here too. So I head up our market strategy team here at United. What my team does is really looks kind of at a very local level in each of the hubs that we serve. How can we be more effectively serving customers and winning their business as the carrier of choice for them? So we'll share a little bit more about that kind of as we get into the discussion. But I know we were going to roll the video. So I think Amanda's pulling it up, and I will pause there and we'll go ahead and dive back into it after that.
This is the story of an airline. It begins a century ago. Wait, let's find a better way in. This is the story of an airline, one that's a force for good. And it's got everything. Romance, suspense, setbacks, seatbacks. It's a sci-fi story about a piece of trash that fuels a plane to help protect the planet. It's a rescue story to save a connecting flight told over and over and over again. And a coming-of-age story about a little girl who dreamed she could fly, and then did. Trust me, you won't want to put this one down. In fact, you can't because you're in it. Yes, you! Along with thousands of other hero characters on a mission to do good in the air and beyond, making the world a happier, friendlier, safer, greener, more inclusive, more fascinating place. The end. No, wait, that's not right. This story doesn't have an ending. But that's kind of the point of the story. We're never finished, because this is the story of an airline when good leads the way.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that, BJ. And I think the Good Leads the Way campaign and that video captures every emotion that people have when they're traveling. I thought it'd be awesome, maybe just to start out, and I know Good Leads the Way was a huge branding initiative for United, one of your biggest ones in the last sort of decade or so. I'd love to just you've you touched on what your role is at United right now, but you've been there for almost a decade yourself, 9 years. So it'd be cool just maybe share a little perspective on the campaign and a little bit of your journey at United. That'd be great.
Sure, definitely. So I'll share a little bit personally just from my journey at United. I've worked across a variety of different groups, started in marketing and have kind of worked my way back to it, but spent some time in customer experience, human resources, employee engagement. And for me, being a part of United right now is really unique. And I think the embodiment of the brand campaign, we're at a turning point for the company in a very different place than we've been during the 10 years that I've been here. And part of the reason why we launched this campaign when we did is this is the embodiment of a lot of the proof points that we've been putting into market as we've taken actions over the course of the pandemic and coming out of it, and really trying to identify opportunities to do the right thing and to do good in the actions that we take. And so, at the start of COVID, that was things like running repatriation flights to get people back home, moving PPE out of other parts of the world in order to get it to places where it's needed most, and really kind of being a responsible citizen to help respond to the needs of the world more broadly, not just necessarily our customers. And so As we think about kind of how good leads the way came to be, that's really where kind of the impetus of it was we've, we think about ourselves as the opportunity to be a force for good in a lot of different capacities. And this is our opportunity to now tell customers about it. And it's a very different way that we've kind of talked about our business. Typically, us or any other airline often talks about just the product and the experience. And those are important parts of, why customers would choose to fly with us. But quite honestly, we felt like, especially at this moment, given a lot of what we've done during COVID and coming out of it, this is a way to talk a little bit differently about who we are and what we do for the world more largely.
That's awesome. Well, it's a great campaign for sure. How's it going so far? I know it launched in May.
It's been great. Yeah, we've gotten really tremendous positive responses. I will say what I think is particularly cool is having our employees highlighted in it. We get really incredible responses from them as well, right? Typically employees are not necessarily front and center for any brand's campaign. And for us, every employee who you saw in that video and in any of the other assets that we have, they're actual employees, and the uniform they're wearing, that's the actual job that they do. And so there's such a sense of pride, I think, for our employees across the globe to be able to see themselves reflected as a part of what we've put out to market.
Very cool. Very cool. Awesome. Well, listen, you touched on COVID, you touched on sort of the criticality of this time and whatnot. We're definitely thinking about come back to this, but one of the things that I thought was interesting, just as I learned a little bit about your role, is it's not just marketing; it's really all around growth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And looking at all different aspects of growth. So, sort of taking it from the balcony of good leads the way and having sort of people feel good about United to sort of driving growth and increasing market share in hubs. Like, tell us a little bit about sort of how those dots are connected.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think internally we refer to our growth plan as United Next. And what United Next means is we are taking 100 airplanes starting next year, every year for the next 5 years. So it's 500 airplanes over the course of 5 years. These are brand new airplanes with state-of-the-art technology, overhead bins that can accommodate every single person's carry-on bags, best-in-class CPAC entertainment, Bluetooth-enabled technology, really the kind of best of the best. But what that 100 aircraft per year means is we are growing faster than any airline in the history of the world has ever grown. And so there's a lot of work that has to go into every element of that. And where my team sits in that, and as we work kind of in each of these local markets, we have to figure out ways to acquire customers who may not have any familiarity with the United brand. And we have to find ways to get them to, we use the phrase all the time, they got to try us in order to like us. Because for some customers, especially some of the younger generations and those who maybe aren't as familiar with travel, they may not know United. And there's also others who may know us, but they know us from 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And the experience that we are delivering on today from a customer experience perspective is very different from what it was previously. And so in order to acquire customers and really support that growth, we've got to find unique mechanisms in order to make sure we can get them onto our airplane to experience what that new United experience is like today.
Yeah, it's awesome. Well, as a traveler and as you're describing 100 new planes with unlimited overhead space and whatnot, it sounds dreamy. So that's great. So yeah, there's definitely a bunch of sort of tactics and things I'd love to drill into based on what you just talked about. Before we go there though, you mentioned sort of like now's a turning point for the company, right? And obviously, the airline industry was hit pretty hard in COVID, and now you're sort of seeing a surge come out of it. But I'd love to, and you were obviously there through the entire pandemic, so it'd be great to talk a little bit about just maybe United's journey through the pandemic, and really what do you mean now when you're sort of talking about sort of a turning point for the company?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. I think, if we think back to March of 2020, which in so many ways feels like a lifetime ago, for us, we were watching kind of firsthand what was happening and a little bit in advance of other airlines because of our exposure to flying to Asia. We have more flying to Asia than any of our competitors in the US do. And so we started to see some of the demand patterns on that. And, as we hit those early days of COVID, it really forced this sort of how do we react quickly and how do we take steps in order to address the situation, despite the fact that we're facing, at its worst point, we were down 97% from a revenue perspective, right? I mean, just essentially no flying happening. And yet there was a need to innovate very quickly to say, all right, how do we establish the right cleanliness protocols and make sure that people understand there's HEPA air filters that are on our airplanes, being first to put a mask mandate in place. I mean, those are things that had to happen very quickly despite a lot of just unknowns and chaos. And I think that was where, we decided, hey, we've got to figure out ways to step up and to do the right thing and to do it quickly. And that spirit of innovation and that spirit of being really responsive to the situation, and then also to what customers were telling us, that's something that's really carried through the pandemic. And it's something that's applying for us today. And I think, we had growth plans before COVID, not quite to this extent. But what happened during COVID, everything was put on hold. And obviously it was just kind of went into survival mode to get through it. But coming out of it, we've been saying from early on, there was a lot of debate about, well, what kind of amount of travel is going to come back, especially in the business travel world, right? Is it going to recover to 50% of what it was? Some people said 75%. From the very beginning, Scott, our CEO, said it will come back to 100%, and it'll actually probably exceed that. And sure enough, that's what we're seeing. And so we've really been kind of building for this moment. And as all of you who are traveling now know, there's some challenges in the infrastructure that exists across the different parts of the travel experience. We as an airline were more prepared for this from a staffing perspective and hiring and sort of getting ahead of it, but we're also reliant on a lot of other parts of the experience that you go through as you go through security and you go through customs and kind of all those other parts of the people who you interact with, and that's making the kind of growth a little bit of a challenge now. But our mentality, to kind of bring it full circle, is this is a set of challenges, and we're kind of equipped to figure out how to navigate them, but using that same kind of innovative spirit that we took, from early on in the pandemic. Yeah,
it's amazing. I mean, we've all missed numbers, but a 97% drop is a pretty colossal drop, and that's it's amazing. The entire industry, it's just admirable, and it's awesome to sort of see it coming back. So when you reflect on it, and now sort of coming out of it, obviously you sort of talked about demand and sort of infrastructure, some of the text on as well. But like, are there any key innovations or any sort of key sort of opportunities that came out of it that for you, which were, obviously without divulging any confidential information, but any sort of aha moments or any innovation that you can sort of tie back to those times?
Yeah, definitely. I'll give one example that I really love, and it's the agent on demand functionality that we have. For those of you who have not had a chance to use it while flying United, it was born out of the pandemic. And what originally drove it was, if you remember, kind of think back to the early days when people were traveling, there was a lot of hesitancy to have any sort of face-to-face interaction with another person, even with a mask on, right? And so our technology team said, hey, is there a way we can do this via what we're doing right here, right? Have an agent who's on the screen, who can talk to me, who can interact with me, who can do all the things that an agent would be doing right in front of me at the airport. And they very quickly built the functionality into our digital channels in order to do that. And what's particularly cool about that is now in today's world, where you have situations where perhaps you get caught in a thunderstorm in the middle of Denver, and a lot of flights get diverted or canceled, something goes wrong. Instead of having to queue up to go talk to a customer service agent, as you previously would have had to do, you can just click right into your app, pop up, and you have an agent who will come and speak to you. And what's great for us is that agent can be anywhere, right? So the thunderstorms are happening in Denver, but we've got agents who are in Tampa or who are in DC, and they have the ability and the time to be able to help out. And so it's a win-win, right? It's a win for customers in that this technology enables them to not be tied to that old process of, hey, something went wrong, I got to queue up in order to figure out how to solve for it. And then it's a win for us from a staffing and employee perspective, right? Because it helps our employees kind of be more productive and make sure that we're using some of their time to serve customers. So that's one example. I could kind of give many different ones, but those are the types of things that when COVID happened, we put our heads together and said, all right, there's a problem here. How do we come up with a solution? And that type of innovation has now lived on beyond just what it was originally intended for.
Everyone can relate with the flight getting canceled and everyone running to the next place and getting in the queue. So the agent on demand sounds like an awesome thing for sure. How about as you think about, obviously you talked about growth is one of your big things, and I'm curious just around what changes you may have seen in terms of customer behavior and lifestyle, and how does that really impact your strategy as you think about growth, whether it's acquisition and getting people to sort of do the try you before they can like you, or even just existing customer relationships. So are there any sort of key trends or changes or things you guys have seen?
Yeah, I think the emergence and continued kind of evolution of hybrid work and remote work is fascinating. And I personally have just done a lot of studying of this. My situation, I was living in San Francisco at the start of COVID, and I relocated to Denver. I can tell you there's a lot of people who live in Denver who relocated from other places as well. They may still work for companies that are based in wherever they moved from, right? And that I think is an interesting concept for an airline, because we are kind of enabling people now to you can live somewhere different than where your office is, and that was never even on the table for most people before. And so really kind of understanding, all right, well, what do those situations look like, right? Where are these people moving to? How often do they have office? What's the setup with their employer, right? Does their employer say, yeah, I'll expense this, or no, you're on your own? And how do we kind of respond to that, both from a network perspective, to obviously make sure we're kind of serving the right places and having the right frequencies and the right products in place, but then also working with our corporate customers, right, to say, how do we help you navigate this talent retention situation that you're facing by employees having more options to work in hybrid and remote situations. But as a company, you've got to solve for still having that time to have your employees together, that importance of in-person collaboration. I think we've all probably felt it, where doing this is a substitute to some degree, but it doesn't replace that feeling of being in the room with the team, being able to brainstorm at the whiteboard, having dinner as a team afterwards. And so I think that's just been, it's a fascinating space to watch, because we, in the pandemic, worked on a partnership with a company called Peerspace. Some of you may know, that does meeting space, has meeting spaces all over the US. It's like Airbnb, but for meeting spaces. And really what we designed was for a company to say, hey, instead of paying for office space, you can take some of that money and use it towards gathering your people from wherever they live across the country or the globe, and doing it on some sort of regular basis. And that was kind of a first iteration of what we saw at the time as an opportunity. I don't think any of us kind of expected that in a mostly post-COVID world here, right, where people are back out and doing things, that we would still have so many people who are in a hybrid or a fully remote kind of setup. And so really just kind of looking, that's one example I would say of customer behavior that's changed, but really giving us on what those trends look like, and then how can we be very responsive in the fact that we've got this connectivity to bring people across different places together, and how do we think about making sure we're being really nimble and adjusting, because this isn't something that has changed and is now locked in for forever. I think we're going to see another iteration of this in 6 months, a year, 18 months, and so on.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, you hit on so many interesting topics there. I mean, we're talking about the future of travel, but really we just talked about the future of work a little bit too, and how that intersects with travel. And so that's super cool for sure. We were talking about, and that was a great example, just about sort of a virtual experience and then sort of in-person experience with that partnership. When you think about some of your customer engagement efforts with existing customers, whether it's existing experiences or new customer acquisition, how are you thinking about engaging with those people to really sort of drive growth? Like, I'd love to hear, I love the example you just gave around sort of, in some ways, almost hitting the employers up, because that's going to drive more travel. But I'm curious, as you're thinking about sort of customer acquisition or engagement with existing customers, just has that changed as well?
It has. Yeah, and I would say really, even before COVID, made significant investments in our digital capabilities. So those who are familiar with the United app, there is no better airline app, and that's in my humble, biased opinion. But the functionality and sort of the ability to connect with customers there and have that be a tool that's just a go-to for them in every element of their journey, both from the pre-planning and thinking about where am I going to go and how do I look at the ability to compare prices on a map and sort of think about, situations where I might want to be inspired to go somewhere as opposed to having a particular trip in mind, all the way through to the actual functionality that exists as you're traveling, both when it's just things are going well and there's kind of standard travel, but then also during, irregular operations. And I think there's probably been more in all of our lives, adaptability to technology as a result of COVID. And that spans all ages, right? I think of my parents, I feel like are more adept with technology than they were 3 years ago. And that's just a product of having kind of been forced into that, right? And so I think that's been an interesting opportunity for us because it was already something that we had invested a lot of resources in. And now it's just how do we kind of use that to connect with customers in different ways? And how do we just provide value to them outside of just the sort of typical things that you might think that an airline would provide? And so that's one of the things we're also giving some thought to as we think about partnerships and we think about just kind of how do we add value to the traveler experience and removing friction from that experience. And there's a lot of different things that are out there. I think there's things I won't go into here just as we're kind of thinking through them as a team. But I think there's huge opportunity there, right? This has kind of unlocked a whole new way of thinking about how you interact with customers and what they care about and what they want, and being able to kind of react to that and try different things. That's been really exciting, and I think we're in a unique time to be able to do even more of that.
Yeah, very cool. Well, I definitely there are a couple sort of partnerships that you guys have been public about, which I would say feel to me like they go beyond sort of a normal sort of travel experience. So I definitely want to sort of double click on those.
Sure.
One thing which I'm sort of intrigued about, which was something I sort of picked up on our discussion today, was this whole try us before you like us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you talked a little bit about sort of a younger generation, and obviously like media consumption has changed as well. And so are there things on sort of the obviously the app's amazing and these things, but someone's got to try you before they can start using your app. So I'd love to hear, like, are there key strategies around sort of the try us piece before they can like you?
Yes, definitely. Well, I think some of that is helping to provide the right incentive to the right customer at the right time. Because if you think about what we have within our suite of options to get customers to come try us, there's your kind of standard, okay, offer a fair discount. And that applies to a certain population that's just very value conscious. There's others that want different elements of the experience that we have that others don't. So things like United Club access that not all airlines have, but that's very important to many people. So being able to offer that to some folks, being able to, and I'm borrowing someone's office here and they just popped in. I would say this is what happens when I'm not in the home office, right?
You need to pause for a second?
I'm good. Yeah.
Okay.
I think he just saw I was in here and closed the door. So,
okay.
But I think to finish that thought, right? Some people who care about price, some people who care about something like having United Club access, having a first class seat, having an economy plus extra legroom seat, right? Those are things that, depending on what you care about as a customer, we need to be thoughtful about what we offer to you because that's going to incent you in order to try us, right? And so I think that's how we think about it. And I would say what we're learning is that there's, as you offer things to customers, it's not always the same in every situation, right? So if you think about for each of you, sometimes when you travel for work and you're traveling by yourself, maybe you do care about having the club access and having, priority security and getting through very quickly. But if you're traveling with your kids and the family, and you want to make sure, all right, we've got seats together and we've got extra time to be able to board early, that might differ by situation. And so I think one of the things we talk about is we're really focused on acquiring the customer, as opposed to thinking about, all right, a business traveler and a leisure traveler, typically we kind of thought of them as like different things. The reality is it's the same person. They're just, in one situation, they're, traveling with by themselves, and in another situation, they're traveling with their family. And so how do we kind of present the right thing to the person in the moment and make sure that that is valuable to them so that when they do try us, we're able to give them a great experience regardless of what their traveling situation is.
Yeah, for sure. Very cool. Two things, actually. One, when we met the other day for the first time, you talked about this word revenge travel. I'd love for you to elaborate on that one a little bit. And then also the point you just made around fare might not necessarily sort of be the North Star. Like any perspective on maybe you can tell everyone what revenge travel is and just talk about
Sure.
the fare piece a little bit too.
Yeah, they kind of go hand in hand to some degree, right? So revenge travel, we refer to it as from people having been locked up for a couple of years, not being able to travel. There's this pent up demand, and I'm sure you all can kind of identify with this, right? Where people are like, I'm going to get on a plane and I've earned that trip to go and go somewhere exciting. And as it relates to the different products, we see an interesting trend in that people are much more willing to pay on their own for a premium experience, whether that's a first class seat, whether that's a United Club membership, whether it's a lie flat Polaris seat as they're going to Europe or to Asia. Those typically were products that were more often bought by the corporate traveler, right? It was something that the company policy says, hey, I can book this. And so that's what I do. And interestingly, what we see is the demand from a leisure perspective for premium products is far different than it was in 2019 and before. So I think that's an interesting trend. And I would say we equate some of that into revenge travel, right? The fact that people feel like, hey, I've been cooped up and I've earned this and I'm going to treat myself. But I also think there's just a paradigm shift in terms of how people view the travel experience. Airlines historically, if you go back many years, were just very commoditized, right? Seats are a seat, and I'm going to pay whatever I'm going to pay, and price is the same, and it doesn't matter if that seat's on us or on one of our competitors. And what we've really seen and what we've invested in, quite frankly, is those differentiators from a product perspective. So having a kind of an economy plus cabin that is sizable to make sure there's always availability for those who want to purchase it, having a premium economy experience, having that lie flat Polaris experience, having Polaris lounges, which are a step above what our United Club experiences are. Those are products that our customers are telling us they value in a way even more than they did before COVID.
Yeah, that's great. So so obviously to offer these experiences and offer this level of sort of personalized experiences, you have to have a great relationship with the consumer. And obviously privacy is a big sort of theme in the market right now. If you have a perspective on it, I'd love to hear it. If not, we could cover other stuff, but just as you think about sort of personalization and privacy, is there sort of a trade-off that you guys think about there, and any sort of best practices or ways you guys approach that?
Yeah, I think for us, so much of how we interact and personalize is the data that customers give to us via the Mileage Plus program, right? If you think about airline loyalty programs in general, part of the whole goal there is for you to share with us the things that matter to you, and we can personalize offers based off that. And we can also kind of see, where are the places that you're going to go, and how do we make sure we have kind of relevant offers for your travel patterns as those evolve. And so that's really how we've historically thought of it. I think the challenge we're facing is to go back to that growth, discussion that we had before. There's a lot of customers who aren't necessarily in the Mileage Plus ecosystems thus far, right? People who haven't yet tried us to like us. And so that's part of what we have to solve for, is how do we find ways to better understand those customers, figure out what it is that, is meaningful to them, and then personalize offers that we put in front of them. And so it's an ongoing challenge, I think, not just for airlines, but for companies more broadly that are trying to grow. How do you go and find those data points that are valuable and personalize it, and being mindful of kind of the privacy challenges that exist sometimes in order to achieve that?
Yeah, very cool. Well, one of the things you told me a little bit about the other day was just sort of younger generation, and talked a little bit about a partnership I think you guys have done with Away. Would love to hear a little bit more about that, because I think it actually is the way you described it to me. It felt like a better experience, but it also felt like potentially a different demographic that you're sort of speaking to. So love to hear you sort of, maybe you could tell everyone a little bit about what exactly it is, and talk about it. That'd be great, because I know it is one of the things that's out in the public that you guys are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So Away, for those who are not familiar with it, is a luxury luggage and travel brand. And it's very, very popular, particularly with Gen Z and millennials. And because they're a brand that's so well known and loved by that demographic, which is core to our ability to bring those types of customers in order to enable our growth, what I talked about before. We just saw a great intersection with them to find a way to kind of infuse the Away experience in with our brand. And so what we've established with them, there's kind of a bunch of different components of it, but the most visible one to customers is the amenity kits that you get in premium cabins. And so they are designed as little away suitcases, and that has your eye mask, your toothbrush, your hand lotion, and all the kind of amenities that come with that. But from a intersection with each other's customer bases, there's really great opportunity, because there's a certain amount of away customers who are really loyal to the away brand and have a lot of loyalty to them, who are not necessarily folks who have experienced United before. And so it's a great way for us to get in front of that audience, and vice versa. There's a whole slew of customers. Anybody who's on a United airplane, they're a traveler, right? So they're kind of a natural fit for away, and getting that customer segment exposure to the away brand is a win-win. So I think that's how we really think about partnerships like that, is, as we look at the types of customer segments that are out there that we're trying to reach, how do we find partners who help us reach those segments that maybe we don't quite have as good of a grip on as we'd like to. And I think the away partnership has just been such a success from our ability to do that in a really meaningful and different way.
That's awesome. Very cool. Very cool. Would you characterize the stuff you guys are doing with Impossible Foods in a similar way, or is that totally different?
I think it's similar and it's different. I mean, Impossible is interesting because, and for those, most people I assume probably know Impossible, but the meatless meat is what it is, right? So for vegetarians and vegans, one of the things we keep a really close pulse on is just feedback from our customers on a variety of different things, right? And we have many mechanisms to get this. The main one is the post-flight survey, where customers can tell us, all the things that they loved and didn't love about their flight experience. And one of the things that we've seen is customer dining preferences have changed over the years, and there's a really strong desire to have plant-based options. And so as we took that feedback in, what we said is, all right, let's go and find someone who has a really high quality product that will kind of fit into our ecosystem, and that has some brand recognition associated with it, right? Impossible is a relatively well-known brand. And being able to then infuse them into the menus that we have on our cabins, it's a win-win in that it is something that's responsive to an issue that our customers have raised, right? We now have for customers who are vegan or plant-based in their diet, we have a great option for them. But then it's also, to kind of what I talked about with Away, Impossible opens up doors for us with people who may not necessarily be familiar with United, but they're very loyal to the Impossible brand, and having them see that we're connected in with them, that's obviously a win as well, in order to achieve that outcome of trying to get customers to try us and get exposed to us in order to like us.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's awesome. Yeah, it's interesting. I have always sort of thought about, obviously, travel, and there's natural sort of partnerships with other people sort of endemic to you in the travel industry. But these other ones are very, very cool. How do you sort of, and they sound like, they definitely are sort of a better experience, but also helping, expose the brand to new people, to new segments, if you will. So is that a strategic partnerships, like a big focus area for you? And is that as you think about sort of different levers for growth, is that an important thing that's top of mind for you guys?
It is, definitely. And I think there's the bigger partners, kind of like I talked about with Away and Impossible. I'll also give examples of, we're thinking about smaller partners as we grow in specific routes. So we've, recently kicked off a lot of new routes to very exciting places, and we're running trade missions and other opportunities to kind of get folks out there to experience it. And so being able to find those partners, we ran a recent trade mission from Denver to Munich, as we launched that route with the World Trade Center and German American Chamber in Denver. Those are really kind of local partners that can help us, find the folks in the business community who are going to use that route and then take them on a trip. And we've recently announced a San Francisco, Brisbane, Australia flight. We're doing a lot of expansion in Australia in partnership with Virgin Australia, and having planning a trade mission to do that very similarly in partnership with Bay Area Council in San Francisco. So that's part of how my team looks at the world, is how do we think about, as we're going to grow and we're going to look at the need to sort of find partners who can help us get in front of the people who are going to make a route work, being really kind of thoughtful about how we do that. And then really also just thinking about how you create visibility. Because one of the challenging parts with new routes is, like, those of us who work at United, we're really familiar with the fact that we're flying to the Canary Islands, and to Mallorca, and to the Azores, and all these cool places. the average customer isn't necessarily, right. And finding ways to expose that to them, to then inspire them, especially on the leisure travel side of things, to go and try those out. Partners are really helpful for us in that, right? They have an ability to kind of reach, audiences and others and use channels that we don't have access to. So that's how I would say we think about it at a local level. And then to what I talked about kind of before with Away and Impossible, customer segments more broadly, we really think about how do we reach those via those bigger partnerships.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. And I think that's one of the cool things about your role is you actually sort of get to see the things at sort of the top of the thing, but then you got to, gain market share in the local markets and the hubs, which is great. So thinking about sort of the future of travel, which is the theme here, obviously there's sort of a year out, right? And so, I'd love, and I didn't share this question with you beforehand, so going slightly off script, but that's okay.
That's all right.
Maybe 3 big focus areas, sort of thinking out sort of 1 year, and then maybe as you think out, 5 years, right?
Yeah.
You talked about some of the growth you guys are doing around adding a lot of capacity and changing the experience and whatnot, but as you think about consumer engagement and growth sort of out 5 years and how things are changing, I'd love to hear your perspective on that too. So two-part question. One, sort of big 3, 1 year out, big focus areas. And then as you think sort of 5 years out.
Yeah, I think the near term, and this is near term and it'll extend to the longer term, but it's investment in the customer, really kind of finding those things that matter as we're trying to improve NPS scores, generate loyalty, and then supporting our growth, kind of all the things that happen with taking 100 airplanes in a year. We got to be laser focused on that and managing costs in the process, right? I think that's the other challenging part is every company is facing right now with inflation and supply chain challenges and all those different things. As you do that, how do you kind of navigate that? And those are 3 near term, like we're laser focused on those. How do we do those and really deliver in a meaningful, great way for customers? And that's going to continue. I would say bigger picture as we think 5 years out. My personal opinion is I think there is so much evolving technology that's out there that we have not even seen yet, right? And some of this we're involved in. We have a United Ventures team that works to help us achieve our sustainability goals. And so they're looking with partners like Boom, who does supersonic travel, right? And they're looking at supersonic travel that will be fueled with sustainable aviation fuel. So that's aviation fuel that's made from household trash. And investing and spending time with those types of companies to say, and that's, Boom is one end of the spectrum. The other is, electric aircraft, smaller eVTOL planes, these things that are kind of shorter distance. I think there's so much that's there. And I think when people talk about electric airplanes and some of this stuff, it seems very futuristic. It seems like the Jetsons, right? Like, that's 20 years out. I think a lot of this can be achievable in the next 5 years. And as we bring our experts from the airline world to partner with some of those technology experts who are out there, I'm just really excited about what we're going to see there, because I think that we're maybe collectively underselling what might be possible.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. I saw a presentation last week on the metaverse and Web 3.0 and all these technologies, which I learned a lot about. I actually think could be super interesting for travel, just all these virtual experiences and how do you make people aware of the Azores and Canary Islands? It seems like it's a heck of a lot better than some of the ways we're showing ads to people today. So
totally agree.
It could be very cool. Very cool.
I think there's so much there on the travel front that is, when we think about inspiring travel, that's so much of what we're in the business of. What better way to inspire it than to have a virtual version of it and say, hey, this is, you actually can head there and here's your nonstop flight in order to get there in 8 hours. So.
And look, your overhead fits no problem.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Well, listen, I've loved our conversation today. I know we have about 2 minutes. So if there's I haven't seen any questions come in, but if there's questions, people feel free to put them in the chat window. Maybe, as we close out, any advice that you have for companies in the space or companies sort of trying to work with people in your industry as well? Just any sort of thoughts that are sort of top of mind for you, or any perspective you thought would be useful to share with everyone before we wrap?
Yeah. I think for overarching is as we think about really changing the customer experience associated with travel and doing things that are outside the box, I think very open to those concepts that are out there, especially that can be done in a cost efficient way, right? I think often I'll hear for partners and it's like, okay, here's this and this is the millions of dollars it costs in order to do it. And given where the industry is, quite honestly, that's just not, it's not possible, right? We don't have the cash to sort of do that, but there's so much that's out there that is sort of smaller scale, can test it, can prove the value. And we're really open to learning about that, right? And I think that's for partners who are in the space, kind of learning what's there. How do you see it as something that really enhances the experience, and then also is just a competitive differentiator, right? I think that's something as well. The industry, as we're all growing, right? I talked about our growth plan, but I know Dana was on from American before, and there's some other, everybody's growing, right? And so I think being able to support that growth and do it in a really thoughtful way with things that differentiate us, I would say that's something I'm focused on. I can tell you it's something that I'm sure my peers at all the other airlines are focused on as well.
Awesome. Well, we are right on time. How's that, Carrie?
On the money. You know what? You got the airlines bringing it home. You got to bring it home on time. I think that says a lot, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation, and this was great. So appreciate that.
Yeah, and I appreciate you sharing all the perspective and detail, and congrats on all you guys' success with the new campaign and everything. It's I really enjoyed hearing a lot more about United today and hearing your perspective. So it was great. Carrie, anything else before we wrap, or back to you?
Got it. We asked my favorite question. It started with the first session and it just bubbled. Everybody had to answer where they were going next. It was great. I think we need to do that for all of the events.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Cool. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Carrie.
Right.
Thanks, BJ.
So much.
See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.